So first, I just wanted to say welcome to birding. If you are someone who is already watching birds in your backyard and at your feeders, you're already birding. And the birding is, excuse me, is a hobby, and it's the hobby of carefully observing birds in their natural habitat. So again, that's probably something you're already starting to do by watching the birds around your home. And you're in very good company. There are over 45 million people in the United States who bird. All right, and it's through this careful observation of birds that is how you can identify them. And I'm going to walk you through an observation checklist, which are sort of the different steps that you can take to being able to identify birds. All right, the first step to think about in bird identification is the location and the season. All right, so I have here, up here, I'm showing you two different range maps. One is for the Carolina chickadee and the other for the yellow-rumped warbler. And if you look at the Carolina chickadee's range map, and I just want to say all these range maps, you can find these kinds of things in any kind of field guide on birds. So let's look at the Carolina chickadee's map. And you'll see a portion of the United States that's purple, and that's showing where Carolina chickadees can be found. So you can see they're throughout the southeastern United States, and they're also found there year-round. But if you look at the range map for the yellow-rumped warbler, you can see there's a lot more colors there because there's a lot more going on with their range. And if you look at Virginia, you'll see that most of Virginia is blue, and that's showing that that particular species is only found here in the wintertime. And during the summer or their breeding season, they're actually found much further north in Canada and Alaska. So by noticing
Jessica, you're muted.
Oh, I hope for not for too long. Okay, okay, we didn't miss anything there. Okay, so moving down to our next step there. The next is habitat. So here I'm showing you some different habitats. Just some different examples of habitat. And the thing to know about birds is that different families of birds, different species of birds, they have very specific habitat needs. So the birds that you would find out in the mountains in a sort of a high elevation forest are very different than the birds you would find over at the coast, along, say, the beach, along the seashore. Or the birds that you would find in a backyard garden or in a meadow would be different than the birds that you would find maybe in a big open marshland. So by thinking about what habitat you're in and observing birds, and you can further, again, narrow down what possibilities of bird species you are seeing. And then the next to think about is the silhouette of a bird, or its size and shape. And take a look at the silhouettes that you're seeing on the screen. You might be surprised to notice that you actually can identify some of the birds here. So starting at the bottom left there, you can probably recognize that that's a hummingbird. And then next to that is a sparrow. And next to that, an American robin. And then a crow, and then a goose. So look how, without any details about color or pattern, how informative just that simple information about the size and shape of a bird can be. And this is so important because oftentimes when you see a bird outdoors, you don't always have that perfect lighting to see those kinds of details. And this is usually the first kind of step that helps you to start to narrow down what bird you're seeing. And another factor to think about is the behavior and movement of a bird. So different bird species have different behaviors, and some of them can be quite unique from one another. And in fact, even the way a bird moves can be very informative. So if you look at the pictures here, I have some illustrations of flight paths that birds take. And look at the duck, how the duck flies very straight when it flaps its wings very quickly, versus the finch that has more of a bouncy type of flight, or the gulls that have sort of this lazy, slow, undulating up and down flight. And then they flap their wings very slowly. We'll be talking more about these things in the presentation too. And the next is sound. So when you are now hearing the sound of an American robin, some birds sing, almost all birds have calls, and some birds make sounds with just their bodies. We'll talk a lot more about sound today, but this is a really important way to start to observe birds and to make identifications. And songs are very unique, and oftentimes you can identify a bird simply just from listening to it carefully without even seeing it. And then finally, the last step to think about are the colors and patterns of a bird, or also known as its field marks is how I'll refer to it from now on. So here, if you look at these diagrams of a bird, you can see lots of different parts of its body are labeled. And each one of those different body parts can be a different color from the next. So even like the bill might be a certain color, or its tail could be a certain color, or the rump a different color. And those are those field marks that help you to make a visual identification of the bird. And some of these can be quite detailed. If you look at the wing, some birds have stripes on their wings known as wing bars, or a patch of color on their wing called a wing patch. And then look at the face of that white-throated sparrow and all of those different markings on its head, like an eyebrow stripe and a crown stripe. All of these little details are key things to observe to help you identify a bird. All right, so as we continue on in our presentation and we meet our backyard birds, I want to let you know I'm mostly going to be focusing on size and shape, behavior and movement, sounds, and colors and patterns, or these field marks. I am not going to be talking so much about habitat or location and season because I've already narrowed down the birds for you. So all of the birds I'm showing you today, they all can be found in Southeast Virginia, and they're all found here year-round. And the habitat for all of them is the same. They can all be found in your backyard or at your bird feeders. All right, so let's meet the birds. I'll be introducing you to 11 common birds that you can find at your bird feeder, and we're going to talk in depth about each one and how to identify it. Starting with a bird that's probably familiar to most of you, and that's the northern cardinal. So cardinals, starting with size, they're about the size of a robin. Their shape of their head it's very angular. So that tuft of feathers that you see on top of a cardinal's head, that's called a crest. And take a look at their bill. It's actually quite large compared to the rest of that bird's head. And it's very triangular in shape. Take a look at the cardinal's tail. Look how long its tail is. And now for its field marks. One of the major things to know about cardinals is that the males and the females look different. So, very familiar to most of you, I'm sure, is that the male cardinal is red. But take a look at that female. The female is brown with touches of red in her crest, in her wings, and in her tail. Now, both the male and female have the same sort of black facial marking surrounding their bill. And both of them have red colored bills. And now for the sounds. So cardinals are very vocal birds. Actually, they're a little bit unique in the fact that both the males and the females sing. For most bird species, it's actually just the males that do the singing. But in the case of the cardinal, they're one of those where the females also do sing. And like I said, they're extremely vocal. They sing multiple different songs, and there's quite a few variations to their song. But they all share the same sort of qualities. So I want to talk about that with you. I'm going to play their song in just a moment. And when you listen to it, I want you to really pay attention to the quality of the song. And it's a loud song. And the whistles are very slurred. And they're sort of upward swept in their pitch. And if you listen carefully, you can hear how there's usually 1 to 2 parts to the song, or parts or like syllables of speech. So that they're giving those, and they give those in a series. So they're repeating certain phrases over and over. Now, there's several mnemonics. A mnemonic is really just a trick for remembering something. It's a really important tool for listening to bird song because it helps you to recognize a song when you hear it outdoors. And they might sound really silly, but they're incredibly actually informative and descriptive, and they really do help trigger your memory when you do hear it. So like I said, multiple songs for the cardinals, so lots of mnemonics. So they're often described as sounding like choo, 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 or pichoo, 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 or what, or birdie, birdie, birdie. So I'm going to play some of these things for you. I'm going to play the song. Hopefully we all hear it. And again, really pay attention to just the quality of the song. And again, the slurred, sort of upward swept pitch. All right, so hopefully you were recognizing that kind of slurred quality to the song and that upward swept pitch. And hopefully you recognize some of those mnemonics. I'm going to play another clip for you that also listen to it sing, but then it has a certain ending. So cardinals often end their songs with a sound that kind of I've heard described as it sounds like a laser gun shooting, like shooting lasers. So let's take a listen to that. So the call, it sounds like a metallic chip note. People describe it as sounding like it's saying tick, and it's just one noted. Or I've heard it described as gym shoes on a basketball court, which I think is really descriptive. So let's take a listen. Okay, I'll play that one more time.
Okay.
All right, great. I'm seeing a thumbs up, so I'm guessing that means people heard it. So that makes me really happy. Okay. All right. So, and now take a look. So we were just talking about the blue jay. Again, long pointy bill, a crest that they can raise or lower. And their tail is long and broad and rounded. You can see that well on this next slide here, that broad rounded tail. Okay, and now what I'm noticing here on this slide is look at how we all think of blue jays as blue, right? But it's really just their back that is blue. If you look at the underside of the blue jay, notice it's all white, right? With some black markings. So if you were to look at a blue jay from below, it wouldn't look blue at all. It would look like a white bird. So that's just something to note because you don't always get a perfect view of a bird to see everything about it. Now, for the behavior of a blue jays have a reputation of being aggressive at bird feeders, which actually they're not quite as aggressive as some other birds can be. And birds are thought to clear more because the blue jays often imitate a hawk in one of their calls. And another behavior of blue jays is they flock. So they flock with others. They're very social birds and they have strong family bonds. So you often might see blue jays together. And they have kind of a cool feature on their body. They have a throat pouch where they can cache food in it and store it elsewhere to hide it. And that's what you're seeing there in that picture is that throat pouch. All right, moving on to the sounds of the blue jay. Blue jays are another very vocal bird, and they do have multiple calls. So I'm going to play a couple different calls for you, but starting first with the most common call that the blue jay makes, which is described as being loud and noisy and harsh. And it just has one part to this call. Some mnemonics to describe it is it sounds like the blue jay is saying jeer or screaming its name, jay. So let's listen to that. All right, so that's the blue jay call. Now for another call that it makes sometimes is more of a whistle, and it's a little more, much more pleasant than the last one I played. It's described as sounding like it's saying tulali. I'll play it again. That's a short clip. All right, so that's the blue jay. The next bird, now I've introduced you to two birds that are probably quite familiar to most of you. Now we're going to move into some that might be a little less familiar. So starting with the Carolina wren. Carolina wrens are small birds. They're slightly smaller than a sparrow. Take a look at the shape of the Carolina wren. It has a plump, kind of rounded body, chunky. The tail is upturned and they have a long bill that curves downward. It's long and slender. Now, one thing to note is that upturned tail is something that it's often up, but they can also lower it. The field marks for the Carolina wren, the most distinctive one is that bold white eyebrow above its eye. But they have a brown back. And if you look at the back, look at its wings and its tail and how they have a subtle pattern to them. Take a look at the belly of the Carolina wren. It has this kind of tan, buffy colored belly. And now for the behaviors of the wren. Wrens are busy, active birds. They're a lot of fun to watch, one of my favorites. And often I can recognize a wren from far away just by the way it's moving about. They often pivot from side to side, and with that upturned tail, it can all be together. That's quite distinctive. They move sometimes scooting up and down a tree trunk. And like I said before, they have the ability to raise and lower their tail. So the tail is usually up when they're foraging for food, and when they're singing, it's in a downward position like you see in the picture. And now for the sounds of the Carolina wren. Carolina wrens, yet again, another extremely vocal bird, and it's a great one to get to know because you hear them a lot. There's many variations, kind of similar to the cardinal, how it had a lot of variations to its song. So does the Carolina wren. The quality of the song is really what stands out the most, and that's that it's very quick, quick whistles, and they have this rolling kind of chanting quality to their song. And that's because they repeat the same phrases over and over in a series. There are parts to each phrase is usually like a 3-part, sometimes it's 2. Lots of different mnemonics are used. The most well-known one that people talk about is that it's saying tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. That also kind of sounds like they're saying Tweety bird, Tweety bird, Tweety bird. Some other phrases that are used are like Germany, 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 or tweedle, 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 or tweeby, tweeby, tweeby. So lots of different ones. I'm going to play it now. Again, listen for that chanting quality to the song and see if you can recognize some of those mnemonics I mentioned. All right, and now I'm going to play this again for you just because it's a really important bird to get to know, and it is so complex, the different variations to their phrases. All right, so those were the songs of the Carolina wren. Now, a lot of times they'll end their song by a trill, or sometimes you'll just, or I'm sorry, it's their call is the trill. So you'll hear this a lot as well. And there's kind of a descending kind of in pitch to the trill. So take a listen to that. All right, so that's the Carolina wren. We'll move on now to the tufted titmouse, another small bird. So they're about the size of a sparrow or even smaller. It's another bird with a crest on the top of its head. But notice how stocky this bird is. Again, it's got a kind of a plump round belly, not much of a neck. And take a look at that bill on the bird. It's very short and stubby and kind of slightly rounded. And for the field marks of the tufted titmouse, one of the things that really stands out to me is they have this sort of wide-eyed expression, sort of that caught in the headlights kind of look to them. And then above the bill, they have a little black patch above it. So that's pretty unique. They have a gray back, they have a white belly, and then they have this beautiful apricot colored stripe on their side, or their flank is often referred to that part of the body as the flank. Again, similar to the Carolina wren, tufted titmouse, it's another really busy, really active bird, and they're often flitting about in tree branches and the outer branches of a tree. If you watch them at your bird feeders, you might have noticed how they sort of eat like one seed at a time. They'll carry a single seed from the bird feeder over to a perch, and then they eat it there. They crack it open with their bill, then they fly back, get another seed, go back to the perch to eat it. So that's kind of a distinctive behavior on the tufted titmouse. And this is another bird that flocks. So similar to the blue jay, they're social, and you can see them with other birds. Now for the song of the tufted titmouse. This is a much more simpler, kind of easier to get to know song than the cardinal and the wren that are so complex. They really just have one song. They sing it really fast. It's a clear whistle quality, but they also repeat this in succession. It's a two-parted phrase where they're saying, sounds like they're saying, Peter, Peter, Peter. Now I'm going to play the sound clip for you, and you're actually going to hear one tufted titmouse calling to another one, and so they're kind of singing, calling back and forth to one another. All right, I'm going to play it one more time. All right, so that's the song of the tufted titmouse. Now the Carolina chickadee, this is a tiny bird. It's smaller than a sparrow, but they're super cute with that round body they have. It's almost spherical in shape. Another plump round belly with a large head, not much of a neck. And that bill, look at that bill, really short and stubby bill. and the field marks of the Carolina chickadee. They're quite handsome, quite striking. Most noticeably that cap on top of their head. So that black crown on their head, that's referred to as a cap. They have a black cap, and then their throat is black. They have a gray back and a tan belly. This is a bird that has kind of a friendly reputation. They often allow you to kind of see them quite close up. So they're kind of thought as being sort of approachable with that reputation they have. They flock in the winter time. So again, you'll see them flocking with their own species, even with others. And this is another bird that sort of likes to eat in private. At the bird feeder, they'll grab a seed and then they'll fly off to a perch to eat it away from others. And they'll continue back and forth like that at the bird feeder. Now for their sounds. The song of the Carolina wren has quite a gentle quality to it. It's a very gentle whistle. There's 4 syllables or parts to their song. And the mnemonic is described as that it's saying Phoebe, 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 Phoebe. So I'm going to play that for you. All right, and next the call. The call kind of sounds like they're saying the last part of their name, that D part of chickadee, like they're saying D, 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 D. All right, so that's the song and the call of the Carolina chickadee. Now we're going to move on to nuthatches. I'm going to introduce you to both the white-breasted nuthatch as well as the brown-headed nuthatch. Now, like I said before, both of these can be found in southeastern Virginia, but the brown-headed nuthatch, this is where it meets the in very southeast corner of Virginia. It kind of meets the northern end of its range. So if you're tuning into this from elsewhere in the state, you may or may not be familiar with the brown-headed nuthatch. But if you're in the Norfolk, Virginia Beach, kind of Hampton Roads area, you probably have seen the brown-headed nuthatch before. So on the screen, I'm showing you the white-breasted nuthatch. So both the brown-headed and the white-breasted, they have the same kind of size and shape. They're both really small birds, smaller than a sparrow. They both have very short tails. Look how short and stubby that little tail is on that nuthatch. And their bill is long and chisel-like. Now, kind of unique on this white-breasted nuthatch is that it has an upturned quality to its bill. Okay, now you can see both the brown-headed and the white-breasted nuthatch. So let's start with the brown-headed. So the brown-headed, just like its name suggests, it has a brown cap on top of its head. It has a really pretty blue-gray back, and the underside of its body, its throat is white, and its underparts are white. Again, notice how short its tail is. Now, the white-breasted nuthatch, like its name suggests, it does have a white breast, but also that white face, and it extends down to its white belly. Now, on that underside in the vent area of the bird, it has this kind of rusty coloration that's pretty. On top of its head, it has this black stripe, kind of like a mohawk, down the top and back of nape of its head. And then they have a gray back. Some behaviors that both of these nuthatches exhibit is a very creeping movement. You can often see them kind of scooting up and down tree trunks or along branches, the scooting kind of movement. These are really agile birds. They can often turn upside down and sideways. You can see them on vertical surfaces upside down, just like you're seeing in these pictures. Or you might see them underneath upside down on your feeders. I'm going to start off for a sound with the white-breasted nuthatch. So its song has a really nasal kind of quality. It almost sounds like it's honking, and it's very rapid. It's just one-parted. It repeats the same note in its succession, and it kind of sounds like it's saying wow, 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 wow. Really nasal. So let's take a listen to that. so that's the white-breasted nuthatch. And overall, I kind of think of these, I call them like little clown birds with that white face, the kind of like that clown white face, and then that honking sound they make that's kind of nasal. And their agile movements, they kind of remind me of little clowns. They're kind of fun. Okay, so now for the sounds of the brown-headed nuthatch. Song it's quite different actually than the white-breasted. It's much higher pitched, but it is also nasal, but it sounds more like a squeaky rubber ducky kind of toy. And it has a two-parted phrase that it gives, and it does repeat it in succession. The mnemonic here is cutie, 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 but it says it really kind of fast, really squeaky. Let's take a listen. You probably noticed again, like a rubber ducky is kind of the best way to describe it, squeaky. Okay, now we're going to move on to the American goldfinch. Another small bird, the size of a sparrow. Its head is quite small compared to the rest of its body. Take a look at its bill. Notice how it has kind of a conical sort of shape to it. And then its wings are very long for its body, but its tail is short. Interesting to note on the tail is that it has a notch out of that sort of V shape cut out of the bottom of its tail, the end of its tail. Now for field marks, these are a little more complex than some of the other birds I've showed you so far. We'll start with the fact that the males and the females look different. So here I have a female on the left and a male on the right. Starting with the male has that beautiful, brilliant yellow coloration. It has bold black wings. It has a black cap on top of its head. Its bill is a nice vivid orange color. But let's look at the female. She's much more drab. She has an olive back. Her belly has a little bit of hint of some yellow in it. And then her wings aren't quite as black. They're just more of a blackish, kind of dark charcoal kind of color. Now her bill's not orange. Instead, it's kind of a pinkish color. Some things that both sexes share in common is that they both have wing bars, those white stripes on their wings. It's an important field mark to note on the finch. And then they're both white underneath of the tail. Now this is where it gets a little bit complicated with the American goldfinch, is that they have different coloration from the breeding season, so different coloration in spring and summer than they do in the non-breeding season or in the winter time. So here I have a picture of a male during the non-breeding season. Look how different he looks than he did in the summertime. He's lost all of that beautiful bright yellow coloration. Instead, he has a brown back. He no longer has that orange bill. It's now a black or a dark color on the bill. Just a teeny little bit of hint of yellow remaining. This one has it under his throat. And now the belly is now just kind of a buff tan color. When people often think of American goldfinches as leaving or flying south or something, migrating, that they're gone during the winter. Well, that's actually not true. They actually stick around. And the reason people oftentimes mistakenly think they're gone is because of how drastically their coloration changes. But they're still here. They just look very, very different. So they might be visiting your feeders all winter long, but they're just in this more drab plumage. And that female, even though she looked drab during the breeding season, she also becomes even more drab during the winter time. Now, something else to note is the immatures, the juvenile goldfinches, they also look different too. They look even more drab than the non-breeding male. So now some behaviors to note about the American goldfinch. They form flocks, so you can often see them flocking with each other around your bird feeder. And they have a bounciness to their flight. So that's what I have illustrated here at the bottom of the screen is that flight path. So if you ever watch them take off in flight from your bird feeder, watch them as they fly away. Watch how they bounce up and down as they're flying away. That's oftentimes, we only see birds in flight. So that's where it's important to kind of pay attention to the different patterns that birds have when they're flying. That may be all you get to see. And now for the sounds of the goldfinch. This sounds, again, really different from the last birds that I've been playing for you. Really, there's no mnemonics to remember it, but best thing is to just kind of notice how it sounds like a chatter, and that the quality of the song sounds like birds chattering together. But it has a mix of twitters and warbles to this chatter. I'm going to play it for you now and take a listen to that. All right, so now for the call of the goldfinch. The call is very short and staccato. It gives these really short little notes to its quality. Now this one does have a mnemonic. It sounds like it's saying potato chip, potato chip. And they make that particular call actually is when they're flying, is when they give that call. Let's take a listen. See if you can recognize it saying potato chip. All right, I'll play it one more time. Okay, and next we have the house finch. So another finch, so like the goldfinch, it's about the size of a sparrow. Its shape is very slender type of shape. We saw a lot of plump round birds before. This one has a more of a slender shape to it. Look at that bill and how it has a triangular shape. They're like the cardinal had a triangular shaped bill, so does the house finch. And similar to the goldfinch, it also has a little notch kind of cut out of its tail, although it's a bit more shallow than the goldfinch's was. Now for field marks, this is another bird where the males and the females look different. Now, something that they share in common is that they both have streaky backs and streaky bellies. So those like stripes you're seeing down the bellies, they have this sort of streaky appearance. We're going to start here with the female. So she's on the bottom. Look, she's very plain, very grayish brown overall, although she has that streaky pattern in her face as well. Now the male has a pretty rosy red face, and this kind of rosy red color washes down its throat. The male also has on its rump a rosy red spot on it too. Now you won't always get to see that because it's often hidden under its wings, but if it opens its wings up a bit on its back or it's flying, you might get to see that rosy red rump on his back. For behavior, they're known as just these voracious eaters. You probably see them at your bird feeders just chowing down and hanging out there for a long time, or maybe even underneath of them. They're very social birds, so you can see them in flocks, again, especially at a bird feeder. And like the goldfinch, it has, because it's also a finch, it also has this bouncy kind of flight pattern as they fly off. An interesting thing to note is that the males actually sing year round. So for most birds, most of their singing is done during the breeding season because that's in the springtime or into the summer. And that's because that's when they're trying to attract mates, the males, and they're trying to form their territories. So that's why they're singing then. But the house finch is sort of unique in that it can be heard singing actually year round. Now for the quality of the song, so similar to the goldfinch, it's described as sounding like chatter, but the chatter is different than the goldfinches. It's kind of jumbled and it's a lot of warbling kind of phrases. None of the twitters that the goldfinch had. It's just much more warbling. And then they end oftentimes with kind of a slurred note. So I'm going to play that for you now. Okay. Hopefully, Elizabeth, can you nod if you heard that? Did you? Okay. Okay, great. So next, the call. So the call is kind of an abrasive sound to it, and it sounds like the birds are saying cheep, cheep, but much more scratchy than I did it. So I'm going to play the bird for you. All right, so that is the house finch. We're now going to move on to a couple woodpeckers. Starting with the downy woodpecker. They are very small. That's an important thing to note. We have several woodpeckers that live in Virginia, but the downy woodpecker is the smallest one. And it's about the size between a sparrow and a robin. So really small woodpecker. And like other woodpeckers, they have straight backed posture and broad shoulders. The bill is chisel-like, but look at the downy woodpecker though. It actually has pretty small little chisel-like bill compared to its size. Now for the field marks on the woodpecker, they basically look like a checkerboard. Now the males and females have a difference, but both of them really share this checkerboard appearance. They mostly look the same. They both have an eye line, so that's that black stripe through its eye. They do have a white belly, and they also have a white stripe down their back. But the male, the difference is that the male has that little patch of red on the back of his head at the crown. Behaviors similar to most woodpeckers, they can often be seen circling around a tree trunk, but because they're smaller, they're a little more agile. You can kind of see them going upside down sometimes at your bird feeders. For sound, so this is the first bird I'll be playing for you that makes a sound with its physical body movement rather than singing, say, a song. I'm going to play that for you. It's probably familiar to many of you. So what that is the woodpecker drumming. And when they're drumming, they're actually quite literally slamming their bill into a tree trunk to make that sound. Now for the call that they give, it sounds like the whinny of a horse, and it's quite high pitched. All right, so that's the downy woodpecker. But now I'm going to show you a much larger woodpecker. This is the red-bellied woodpecker. So again, much larger than the downy. It's now between the size of a robin and a crow. One of the largest birds I've shown you so far in this presentation. Similar posture to the downy with that straight back and the broad shoulders. Now it also has a chisel-like bill, but look at how much longer the red-bellied woodpecker's bill was than that downy woodpecker's. Again, the males and the females mostly look the same. They have a checkerboard down their back, but look at how white their belly is. But this is how they get their name. On that white belly, they have this wash of red that's kind of subtle on its belly that you can see on the left-hand side of your screen. You don't often get to see that red color on the belly since they're usually facing a tree trunk or something like that. But that's how they get their name. Now, the difference between the male and the female is that the male has that red stripe like a mohawk down the top of its head and the nape of its neck. Now that female, she sort of looks like she's bald on top of her head by comparison because the red is only found on the nape of her neck on the backhand side. Behavior is similar to the downy woodpecker. They're seen circling around tree trunks or along branches. Now they sometimes kind of pick at the bark more often than they drill into it. So they also drum, but their drumming sounds different than the downy woodpecker. It's quite louder. Now it made a little call there during its drumming. The call is kind of a shrill rolling sound, and it's described as sounding like it's saying chirr. All right, so that's the red-bellied. And now this is the last bird I'm going to be introducing you to, and this is the mourning dove. Mourning doves are a larger size bird. They're the size of a robin, but they have this long and pointy tail. Their body is a little bit plump, but their head is sort of small compared to the rest of its body. But they have this lovely, sleek kind of appearance to their overall shape. For their field marks, they have this pretty soft grayish brown color over their whole body, but they also have on their wings some black spots. Now, when they fly, like you can see on the left-hand side, there's a dove that's flying off. And look at the white tips on its tail feathers. And that's typically something you can really only see when they're in flight. When they're just standing around, you don't usually see that. Although the one in the grass, you can kind of see a little hint of the white edging on that tail. This is another bird that likes to flock, and they mostly feed on the ground. So they do sometimes hop up on your bird feeder if they can, but mostly they're feeding underneath of the feeder, all the droppings from the other birds. Now their song quality is so different than all the other birds I've played. It sort of sounds sad, like they're mourning. That's how they get their name. The mnemonic is like a coo. It sounds like they're saying coo. So excuse my singing. I will play the bird for you. All right, so now you have met 11 different birds. We've talked about each one in depth. I'm going to give you a little quick review of all the birds we just saw. So starting off, we learned 2 familiar birds, larger sized birds, the blue jay and the northern cardinal. We also learned 2 woodpeckers, a small woodpecker, the downy woodpecker, and a larger one, the red-bellied woodpecker. And we learned about the mourning dove. We met 2 finches, I should say. We met 2 finches, the American goldfinch and the house finch. We also learned about Carolina chickadees and tufted titmice. We introduced you to the Carolina wren, as well as 2 different species of nuthatch. The brown-headed nuthatch, again, which is found really just in southeastern Virginia, and then the white-breasted nuthatch, and that one's found statewide. All right, so I have a little review game we'll go through. I am going to show you a bird, like here. We're going to look at the bird, and then if you start to have a guess as to what species of bird this might be, you can go ahead and type it in the chat, and then I will reveal the answer to all of you. So here we have a bird, and let's take a look at it here. What stands out about this bird's shape? Look at it closely. What do you see on top of its head? Do you remember what that was called? That's a crest. So it has a crest on its head. Are there any other colors that you know about the bird? Look at its belly. What color is its belly? What color is its back? It has that bluish gray color. Do you see anything on the side of the bird? It has sort of that apricot colored stripe to it. Oh, I kind of jumped ahead to the field marks there, but I went through the field marks. We talked about the shape of the bird. All right, now we're going to listen to its song. Do you recognize the mnemonic? What does it sound like that bird's saying? Okay, does anyone have a guess? Have you been typing into the chat? Do we have any guesses, Elizabeth?
Yeah, so we have 2 guesses so far. They're both the same. The tufted titmouse. Might have pronounced that incorrectly.
That is correct. So if you guessed tufted titmouse, you are correct. And that song that I was playing, that's the Peter, Peter, Peter. That's the bird that says Peter, Peter, Peter. All right, so tufted titmouse. Next bird. Now for this one, we're actually just gonna listen to this bird. I'm not gonna show it to you. So first, listen to the song. Think about the quality of the song. How would you describe the quality of the song? Think about if you recognize any of the mnemonics. I'm gonna play it again. All right, now for the call of the bird. So that was the song, now I'm gonna do the call. How many parts are in this call? And do you recognize any of the mnemonics we talked about? Okay, so for the song, going back to the song, it kind of might have sounded like kind of slurred, and then it ended with the sound that kind of sounded like shooting lasers. The call, that was the one that's kind of that one-noted chip note, kind of metallic, sounds like it's saying tick, like gym shoes on a basketball court. So let's see, does anyone have any guesses as to what this bird might have been?
I've got some coming in, and looks like everybody's unanimous on the northern cardinal.
Oh, great. You are correct. So good job, everyone. All right, new bird. What stands out about this bird's shape? Look at its shape. What do you see? Kind of plumped belly. It's got a long bill, curved, upturned tail. Do you see any field marks on this bird? Look at that stripe, that eyebrow stripe above its eye. Now we're gonna listen to it sing. As I play the song, again, think about the quality of the song and whether or not you recognize a mnemonic. All right, do we have any guesses?
All right, so it looks like another unanimous for the Carolina wren. I think I said that right.
Fabulous. You all are doing so well. Good job. Okay, now next bird. Here we see two. What field marks do you see on these birds? Look at the wings. Notice how they have black wings? But what's on those wings? They have wing bars. They have brown back, a little hint of yellow in their faces. Now, as they fly, they have a bouncy flight. And let's listen to their call as they're flying. Do you recognize that? Okay, any guesses, Elizabeth? Oh, you're muted.
I'm muted.
Yes.
Okay, so we have quite a few American goldfinches, house finch, and winter finch. Goldfinch, sorry, winter goldfinch.
Okay, lots of good guesses there. So everyone's on the right track. This is a finch. Absolutely right. And it is an American goldfinch. And bonus points for whoever said it was the winter non-breeding goldfinch. Yes, this is the American goldfinch, and it's winter non-breeding plumage. All right, this is the last review bird I'm going to give you. Let's take a close look at it. What stands out about this bird's shape? Look at that bill. It's got a large bill. It's kind of shaped triangular. Kind of a slender body. What field marks do you see? Look how streaky it is on that belly and on its face too. Now, it's flown to a feeder, and what behavior do you observe there? And what field marks are on the other? So behaviors, they're kind of flocking together. It looks like they're chowing down. And some of the birds they're with have some red on their face and down their throat. Do we have any guesses on this bird?
I'm gonna mute myself this time. Okay, so we have everyone was unanimous for the house finch, and specifically a female house finch is on the right.
Fabulous. Well done, everyone. This was a house finch, and it was
left.
indeed a female that I started off showing you. And then at the feeder, it was joined by some males. So wonderful work. I hope you're all inspired by our session today to continue on your birding journey. I encourage you as a next step, if you're not already part of a bird club, to consider joining one. There's lots of bird clubs in the local area. So in Norfolk, there's the Cape Henry Audubon. Virginia Beach has the Virginia Beach Audubon Society. In Hampton, there's the Hampton Roads Bird Club. And if you're tuning in from elsewhere in the state, you can always check out the Virginia Society of Ornithology, which lists, it's a statewide organization, and they list on their website bird clubs from throughout the state. If you don't have a field guide, I encourage you to study a field guide. You can find those online, or there's books, and I'll show you those in a moment. And then finally, just practice, keep practicing. That's the best way to get better. So every time you're watching the birds at your feeder, observe them carefully. Try to make those identifications. When you're out and about on a walk through the neighborhood or doing your chores, notice the birds around you and observe them. Try to identify them. And then finally, if you're really enjoying birding, I really encourage you to consider buying some binoculars. And the classic size binocular for birding, the best one to get would be a size 8x42. Binoculars will give you beautiful close-up looks at birds from a distance. So they're really nice to have. Some field guides I recommend are the Sibley, the National Geographic, the Peterson Guide, or the Kaufman Guide. So those are 4 really great examples of books if you're interested in buying a book. Now at the bottom, I have a couple CDs, and the CDs are how you can listen to the audio clips. I was playing audio clips from the Stokes Field Guide. So if you liked the ones I was playing, that's the Stokes. So web resources and apps. Those include, there's a lot of good ones. There's All About Birds that Cornell has. National Audubon has a great website. You can also download an app from a Sibley app for your phone, and Audubon has an app for the phone. And Cornell has this really cool one called Merlin that walks you through all the different steps of bird identification that I talked about today. And it narrows down some different options for you to help you make your bird identification. So all of these are great options for a field guide if you're not so interested in getting a book. And lastly, I just want to encourage you to stay in touch with the Department of Wildlife Resources. You can subscribe to our newsletter that I mentioned earlier, the Notes from the Field. You can find that on our website. You can subscribe to Virginia Wildlife Magazine. I have my contact information here on the screen, and I encourage you to follow our agency on social media too. And lastly, you might want to consider joining our membership or Restore the Wild. It's a great way to give back to wildlife by supporting habitat in Virginia, and a great way to stay in touch with the Department of Wildlife Resources. And then lastly, if you enjoyed today's presentation, I'd encourage you to tune in tonight to the virtual keynote with Amar Ayash, who's going to be speaking about man and gulls, and that's tonight at 7 o'clock. There's still lots of time to register for that and lots of space available. We have a photography contest that's still going on with the festival. And this weekend, there's a story walk for children. I took my daughter to one of them earlier this month. It was a lot of fun. So that's Saturday and Sunday. And you can, if you're not already following the festival on our Facebook group, please do so. So thank you so much, everyone. We have just a little bit of time left for questions. Elizabeth, did we have any questions come up?
There are, yes. Okay, so we have 3 questions. The first one and the second one I feel like are a little similar. So the first one was, what is the difference between a song and a call? Great. And then why distinguish between a song and a call? Is there a different purpose? That kind of thing.
Wonderful. Great question. So, yes, there is a difference between songs and calls. So, and one part is that songs are much more complex. Complex. They have lots of different parts. They're oftentimes much more musical. They have a clear pattern to them. Versus the calls, you might have noticed, are much more simple. They're oftentimes just short and simple, and they have just the one note to them. But they serve different purposes as well. So, songs are utilized by birds typically in the breeding season, so in spring and summer, and mostly by males to defend their territories. So during that time of year, males are finding their territories and they're defending them, they're creating them and letting other males know this is my territory. So that's why they're singing. But they're also singing, these males, to attract mates, to attract the females. So again, this is why they utilize them mostly in the spring and early summer. Now, the calls serve many different purposes. Birds will have the call notes to give an alarm to other birds if there's a threat nearby, to let other birds know that there's a threat. They might use them to just keep in contact with one another, so that way they can stay in touch while they're foraging. They also would utilize a call sometimes in flight. So like that goldfinch, and the call that I played for you, they give that potato chip call while they're flying. And that helps them when they're in a flock or even during like migration times. And then also begging. So like juvenile birds might be begging their parents and calling for food and using the call for that purpose. So that's just some of the reasons why a bird uses a call and the differences between a song and a call.
Nice, perfect. All right, and then another question was, how far west would you expect to see brown-headed nuthatch in Richmond?
Oh, I'm not sure that you would, because really, like I said, the brown-headed here in kind of like the Hampton Roads area and maybe a little bit in Lower Peninsula, it's really like at the kind of northern end of their range. So I'm not sure that you would see them as far north as Richmond or further west.
Okay. Okay. So that was the questions.
Okay.
Based off of
Well, what?
everything, does anyone have any follow-up questions? Not seeing anything, so I think people
Okay.
are good.
Well, wonderful. I just want to thank all of you so much again for joining us today and for being
Oh,
curious enough about birds to tune into this presentation. I really hope that you feel inspired by it to continue birding. Was there another question?
there is a question
Okay,
actually.
great.
Interesting question. So, somebody's asking, why are you called a watchable wildlife biologist?
Oh, okay. Well, like I said, so my job is all about promoting and providing opportunities for wildlife viewing or wildlife watching, however you want to say it. Watching wildlife, viewing wildlife, and it's all about that. But I am also a biologist. So although I'm largely, kind of a program coordinator, by training, I also studied conservation biology for me specifically. But our fellow Watchable Wildlife Biologist that I have, she is also a biologist by training and studied reptiles and amphibians. So we have that training so that we have a lot of knowledge about plants and about wildlife, so that way we can teach others, and it helps to inform the information that we give and our abilities as wildlife watchers and wildlife viewers ourselves, and that we can help others.
Okay. And then last one was flicker versus woodpeckers.
Oh, okay.
Not sure
So
what.
they belong to they're in the same family. Flickers are beautiful birds. It's very similar size and shape to the woodpeckers, straight backed posture, the broad shoulders. But they have some really unique markings. One of my favorites on a flicker is that it has kind of a mustache kind of marking on it. It's kind of fun, and spotted wings, and they have a little flash of yellow along some of their feathers and some of their wings that you can see when they're flying from underneath. They're a really cool bird as well. But since they're in that same woodpecker family, they share a lot of similar behaviors as well.
Nice. All right. And then it looks like the only other comment was just everyone loved the presentation. But
So
somebody
nice.
has recommended a Sibley book, What It's Like to Be a Bird. So if
Oh,
anyone's
that's
interested
nice.
in that.
Okay, so another book recommendation. That's good. That's nice. Thank you for sharing that with everyone. And definitely, one thing I forgot to mention about the books for the field guide books, sometimes it's nice to get one that focuses on like the Eastern US because that kind of narrows it down. Sometimes when you get one that's like for the whole United States and it has all the Western birds in it too, that could be like a lot of extra information. It also makes the book a little bulkier. And if you're here in the Eastern US, you might want to consider getting just one that focuses on the East. If you want a smaller book. I forgot to mention that. So again, just thank you so much, everyone, and good luck with your birding and enjoy it. I hope that birding brings you as much joy as it has brought to my life. I bird wherever I go. I'm always birding. So it's just a wonderful part of my life to be able to enjoy and appreciate birds wherever I go, whatever I'm doing. So thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And I'm glad so